Before we dive into today's story, if you enjoy tales where humanity isn't just underestimated, but becomes the reason predators rethink their place in the universe, then make sure to subscribe. Here, we share the best HFY stories where Earth doesn't beg for survival, it rewrites the rules. Now let's begin. They were the most feared species in the galaxy. Born on a world of poison storms and apex predators, they evolved not to survive, but to dominate. Entire civilizations fell beneath their claws. Planets turned silent after their hunts. No prey ever escaped, until they found Earth. It was supposed to be easy. A soft planet, warm, lush, full of scattered, noisy bipeds with no real defense. They didn't come for conquest. They came to feast. But their scouts never came back, and the last message from their lead hunter, transmitted moments before the signal went dead, they're not prey. They're the reason predators fear the dark. They called themselves the Carnithol, a species evolved not through cooperation, not through culture, but through pure predation. Born on a world of volcanic storms and carnivorous jungles, their society didn't rise with fire or language. It rose through blood. Only the strongest survived. Only the deadliest reproduced. And only the most ruthless learned to lead. Over centuries they expanded. Not with trade or diplomacy, but through hunt and harvest. They didn't take planets for resources. They took them for sport. Every intelligent species they encountered became part of a grand tradition. The hunt. Some ran. Some fought. All eventually fell. They studied their prey, cataloged patterns, adapted hunting tools, and measured each conquest by how long the resistance lasted. No world had taken more than a few cycles. By the time they reached the galactic frontier, their confidence had grown into something colder, certainty. And then they found it. A little blue world orbiting a quiet star far from the noise of the core systems. Scans showed a breathable atmosphere, a stable biosphere, evidence of scattered infrastructure and localized power grids, primitive satellites in decaying orbit, old-style digital communication patterns, no planetary shield network, no orbital defense array. In short, perfect game. The elders of the Carnithol convened. Debate was brief. The system was marked as unclaimed. The species, humanoid, roughly 2 meters average height, showed no signs of deep space capability. "We hunt," the eldest declared, baring his fangs. "Let them know fear." Dozens of drop pods launched. The fleet orbited high above, cloaked behind dead satellites, watching as the pods slipped silently through Earth's atmosphere. Target zones, remote, forested, spread out across continents. The usual approach: make landfall undetected, establish perimeters, isolate small settlements, begin tracking local life forms, map prey behaviors, then close in. Phase 1. Routine. The Carnithol weren't just good at this, they were the best, and Earth looked easy, too easy. The first report came from the jungles near the equator. A scout pod failed to check in. No distress beacon, no return signal, just silence. The commander dismissed it. Old tech, likely damaged on entry. Then a second team went dark. Northern Hemisphere, mountain range. No signal loss on descent, just a heartbeat of telemetry followed by nothing. The commander frowned. A third pod was rerouted to investigate the last known location of the first team. It landed smoothly. Scans were clear. They deployed a tracking drone. The drone lasted 17 minutes. Its feed showed dense trees, broken terrain. Then, motion. Blurred. Fast. The last frame, a dark shape rushing the camera. And then, black. They ran diagnostics. Thought maybe the environment had corrupted their optics. Sent another drone. This one didn't even launch. It was torn apart inside the pod. The recovery crew found claw marks, but not from animals. These were clean, controlled, human-shaped, the kind of mark made on purpose. That's when the Carnithol realized something they hadn't considered in centuries. Their prey was watching them back. The Carnothal weren't strangers to resistance. Plenty of prey species fought back, clumsy, emotional responses from creatures who couldn't accept their fate. A few even managed to wound their hunters. But it never lasted. The Carnothal always adapted. They had centuries of tactics. They studied prey the way scientists studied bacteria. Earth was supposed to be no different. But something was wrong. In every region where their pods had landed, reports stopped coming in. Entire squads vanished without alerts or beacons. No signs of engagement. No enemy signals detected. Just silence. So they escalated. Recon cruisers dropped low-orbit scouts to scan for heat signatures, looking for signs of their own forces. And that's when they started finding them. Bodies, not dozens. Not lined up for show, just one or two. Left in the open, in odd positions. But these weren't careless casualties. The bodies weren't burned. They weren't looted. They were posed. One slumped against a tree, eyes open, claws out. A crude spear jammed through the armor directly into a joint. Another laid across rock, hands folded, helmet removed, gaze pointed skyward, as if something wanted them to be seen. The message was clear. This wasn't desperation. This was control. The commanders didn't understand. Earth had no centralized planetary defenses, no detected military satellites, no evidence of a cohesive global government or spacefaring army. And yet, wherever the Carnothal tried to push, the humans pushed back. Not with advanced weapons, with intelligence. Their traps weren't random. They were strategic, positioned at choke points, camouflaged against local terrain, designed to exploit blind spots in Carnothal optics. Simple, brutal devices. Spiked pits, counterweighted deadfalls, high-tension wire strung just low enough to catch ankles. But what made them terrifying wasn't the design. It was the speed. Each time the Carnothal adapted, the humans adapted faster. A pit trap would fail once. Next day, the design was different, deeper, laced with heat, baffles to confuse, thermal scans. Their tactics weren't tribal. They were deliberate, even worse. No two human responses were the same. In one region, the humans fought with fire, in another, with sound. Elsewhere, they used mirrored plates to blind drones, or high-pitched frequencies to confuse sensors. And, still, no organized resistance network was detected. There was no command center, no transmissions, no hierarchy. Each cell acted independently, and yet somehow, in harmony. It was chaos, but with rhythm, and it unnerved the Carnothal more than any organized defense ever had. Then came the first audio intercept. One of the pods managed to snag a local communication between two human units. Static-filled, low-powered, likely short-range, but it carried. The words were simple. They don't know the terrain. Make them bleed for every meter. We don't need to win, we just need them to leave. Translated into Carnothal syntax, it didn't make sense. Why would prey not want to win? Why fight without expectation of victory? That was the first cultural miscalculation. Because the Carnothal didn't understand something very human. We fight, hardest when we're supposed to lose. And on Earth, that kind of fight doesn't fade. It spreads. They came for blood. Now they were the ones bleeding. The Carnothal invasion had started like every other hunt. Quiet, clean, surgical. But within days of landing, the balance shifted. Earth wasn't behaving like any other prey world. The humans weren't retreating. They weren't panicking. They were waiting. And when the aliens moved, the humans struck. Not in waves. Not in battles, in ambushes. Fast, sharp, precise. Carnothal soldiers were picked off at the edges. Not in firefights. But while eating, while patrolling, while resting. A shadow from a tree line. A whistle through the wind. Then silence. One scout. Patrol found a body hanging upside down in a tree. Eyes closed. No signs of a struggle. A note carved into his chest plate in perfect Carnothal script. Keep watching the trees. From that day forward, every soldier started glancing upward. They began turning off lights at night. abandoning forward bases, shrinking patrol ranges, not because of orders, because of fear. By the second week, the humans had stopped reacting to the invasion. They'd started controlling it. The Carnithal's superior weapons, plasma casters, grav bolt launchers, auto-tracking visors, were designed for overwhelming prey. But against humans, they were a liability. Humans didn't engage at long range. They waited until you got close. Then they moved faster than their tech could adjust, and they knew terrain. They fought from below, from above, from within. Sewer systems became death traps. Collapsed buildings became sniper nests. Caves turned into mazes with no exits. And the deeper the Carnithal pushed into Earth's terrain, the worse the casualties became. Their AI systems flagged the humans as asymmetric threats. The algorithms had no answer. They couldn't predict behavior. That wasn't logical. They couldn't map strategies that changed every hour, and they couldn't understand an enemy that fought not to survive. But to make sure you didn't, more and more squads went dark. Entire forests were declared black zones. No fly, no scout, no landfall. At first, commanders refused to acknowledge the pattern. Pride overruled caution. But one by one, even the most elite hunter units started breaking protocol. They abandoned equipment. They refused to enter valleys. Some even cut off their own communication feeds. Terrified the humans were tracking signals. The predator species that once inspired fear across the stars was now whispering at night. And worst of all, the humans weren't even using real weapons yet. Yes, there were old rifles, scavenged tech, explosives, but most of their kills came from tactics, from knowledge, from understanding the land better than any Carnithal map ever could. They didn't strike for glory. They didn't posture. They didn't taunt. They just took you, and when the sun rose, you weren't there anymore. The fleet commander in orbit finally issued a planetary-wide status review. The report came back with 4 words: hunting status reversed. Earth wasn't prey. Earth was a crucible, and the Carnithal were learning, too late, what happened when you walked into a world thinking you were the apex, only to find something that had never needed to evolve to beat you. It had just been waiting. The Carnithal prided themselves on dominance. They weren't just physical hunters. They broke their prey mentally. Fear was a tool. Paranoia was a weapon. Entire species surrendered before the first claw was ever raised. But on Earth, it was different. The humans didn't fear them. They studied them, tracked them, learned their patterns, then turned those patterns against them, and they did it without speaking a word. Soon Carnithal soldiers began reporting strange occurrences. Gear moved during the night, rearranged, repacked, set outside the tents. Supplies vanished, only to reappear days later, with the rations replaced by native food still warm. Trophies from previous hunts, skulls, teeth, claws, were found scattered across camp floors, burned to ash. One scout awoke to find a knife embedded in the dirt beside his head, not thrown, placed. There were no footprints, no warning, just presence. Something was watching. Something was near, but the sensors showed nothing. No heat signatures, no bio readings, no movement. Yet the signs were there. Messages carved into trees, in their own language. Symbols left on walls. Patterns of stones arranged into spirals, circles. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. Each new camp had a different mark. And over time, the marks became familiar, recognizable. The humans weren't just leaving messages. They were building a language of fear. A visual reminder that every place the Carnithal went, someone had been there first. One squad reported seeing flickers of movement at the edge of their night vision. Another described hearing music, low, rhythmic, unlike any known to their culture, drifting from the hills during a night patrol. No trace found, no source identified. And then came the whispers. Translated logs from soldier visors included phrases they swore they hadn't said aloud. They know your name. They're waiting for you to be alone. You shouldn't have come here. At first, command dismissed it as stress. Psychological breakdown, the natural consequence of operating in unfamiliar territory. But then a squad's entire biometric record changed mid-mission. Heart rates spiked in perfect unison. Cortisol levels surged. Muscle tension peaked at the exact same second across 10 individuals. And when asked why, the survivors all gave the same answer. They were there, just watching, all around us. What was once a proud, apex force was now checking corners every 10 seconds, removing helmets to make sure the shadows weren't playing tricks, sticking together in groups of 4, then 6, then 12, and still, it didn't help. The first mass desertion happened on day 21st. A full platoon left their position, abandoned all equipment, and fled into the hills, unarmed. They were never found. A week later, a high-ranking field commander was discovered sitting, alone in an empty outpost, still breathing, fully armored, rifle in his lap, eyes open, expression blank. He hadn't been attacked. He hadn't resisted. He had just stopped. His helmet camera recorded one last image before going dark. A figure, human, standing. At a distance barely visible in the fog, no armor, no weapon, just a silhouette unmoving. When scanned, the recording showed no heat source. The figure hadn't blinked. It had just stared for over 9 minutes, then vanished. No trace. From that point forward, the Carnothal stopped calling Earth a hunt. They stopped calling the humans prey. They started calling them something else. Wraiths. By day 34 of the Earth operation, the Carnothal fleet was in chaos. More than half of their planetary units were missing or presumed dead. Squads were abandoning positions. Entire regions were black-zoned. The most advanced species of hunters in the known galaxy had stopped hunting. They were surviving barely. And still, the High Command refused to fully retreat. They demanded data, evidence, something to explain how an undeveloped world was unraveling centuries of tactical superiority. Then, a transmission came in. A single compressed burst routed through 6 emergency relays and tagged by one of the remaining scout units as critical. Attached was raw helmet footage from a recon team last seen deep inside what was once called the Appalachian Range. The feed opened with the usual markers: biometrics, field status, visual readouts. It was calm. The team was moving through ruins, overgrown towns, collapsed roads, vehicles rusted and fused with vines. No human presence detected. No movement, no sound until the camera feed jolted, a flicker in the corner, too fast. The soldier turned, nothing there. Then again, opposite side, a blur between trees. The audio started to spike. Footsteps? No. Breathing, not theirs. Then, static, hard, violent crackling across the audio feed. Not random. It carried structure, a pattern. One of the other soldiers spoke, but not in Carnothal. Their translator registered the words as Terran English, spoken in a voice too calm for a war zone. You were warned. Another static spike. The feed cut to black. Then came the last 30 seconds, the part that froze every commander in the Y fleet. The camera came back online. It was lying on the ground, tilted, dust hanging in the air. The soldier wearing the helmet was nowhere to be seen. But someone, or something, walked into frame. A human, not in armor, no helmet, face bare, calm, focused. He knelt down inches from the lens, stared directly into the camera. Then he smiled, not cruelly, not joyfully, just a small, quiet curve of the mouth, the smile of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And then he spoke. No translator needed. Run. He stood and walked away, leaving the camera untouched. That was the last image recorded. The data burst ended. No follow-up. Just silence. And for the first time in recorded Carnothal history, a unanimous decision was made. Full planetary extraction. Command issued the order not through hierarchy, but through emergency override, the kind only used when extinction was a statistical certainty. It was no longer about salvaging honor. It was about survival. Dropships were recalled. Tactical satellites were detonated. Data cores were purged. And from orbit, as the remaining fleet members watched the planet shrink below them, one question echoed in every command room. What did we just try to hunt? There were no answers, only the footage and the face. The human who stared into their eyes and whispered a word that hadn't been spoken to the Carnathal in generations, a command, a verdict, a fact: run. The aliens had miscalculated Earth from the start. They saw scattered nations, fragmented governments, fierce independence, endless disagreements. To the Carnathal, that signaled weakness, a species too fractured to mount a real defense, easy prey. But what they didn't realize, what they couldn't understand, was that humanity's chaos wasn't a flaw, it was an engine. The moment the first alien pods landed, Earth did what it always did when threatened. It adapted. Fast. The early resistance had been instinctive, survivalists. Veterans, local militias, and civilians who fought with whatever they had. Homemade traps, stolen tech, sharpened metal. But when the world realized this wasn't a drill, wasn't a false alarm, and wasn't going to stop, the planet woke up. Power. Grids went dark, not from failure, but by choice. Governments didn't argue. They activated. Across borders and oceans, old enemies shared intelligence. Encrypted networks linked rogue hackers with defense agencies. Submarines once mothballed were pulled from cold docks and refitted for surface strikes. Cities weren't evacuated. They were repurposed. Homes became bunkers. Warehouses became drone foundries. Schools became coordination centers. And the old war veterans, the ones with memories of battlefields and scars that never healed, stepped forward without being asked. This wasn't about nationalism. It wasn't about power. It was about Earth. For the first time in generations, humanity stood as one, not under a single flag, under firelight. And what the Carnathal didn't understand, what no enemy ever had, was that when humans don't fight for conquest, or survival, or even revenge, when they fight for each other, they become something else entirely. Within 2 days of the first global sync, resistance went from scattered to coordinated. Drop zones were mapped, tactics were shared, weaknesses in Carnathal armor were identified and exploited. Entire forests were rigged with kill zones. Urban zones became sniper galleries. Abandoned rail systems were turned into high-speed assault tunnels. And beneath the waves, old submarines launched modified warheads not for destruction, but for signal jamming, cutting Carnathal communication lines to shreds. For every squad that fell, 10 more learned. For every city they tried to capture, 5 more surrounded them. Earth stopped being a battlefield. It became a trap. One the aliens had walked straight into, and there was no escape. Because this wasn't a world that rolled over. This was a species that had survived extinction-level events, global wars, and centuries of conflict. A species that never needed a reason to fight, only a line to be crossed. And now, it had been. The global response wasn't just retaliation. It was a reminder that Earth may look fragile, but it was forged in fire. And no one hunts fire and walks away whole. By day 41, the Carnathal fleet had stopped pretending it was a hunt. The Predator protocols were overridden. The data cores no longer tracked trophies. They logged losses, and those losses were staggering. More than 70% of all surface units had gone dark. Not killed, gone. No remains, no gear, just silence. Commanders who once roared about dominance now whispered into encrypted channels. Requests became pleas. Evac now. Immediate extraction. The fleet responded. Extraction pods launched planet-wide, quietly, without the usual roar of engines or dramatic rescues. Because this wasn't a retreat with dignity. This was a rescue from failure. Pods touched down in zones once considered secure. There was no fanfare, no waiting lines, just survivors stumbling toward the ships. Those who made it back weren't the same. Their armor was intact, their bodies functional, but their eyes empty. They didn't speak. They didn't salute. They sat in silence, gripping whatever was in reach, rifle stocks, torn gloves, even just their own claws. One extraction team tried to debrief a high-ranking field officer. She didn't respond, just stared ahead, unmoving. When they pressed her, asked what happened down there, she said nothing for minutes. Then finally, with a voice so low the recorder barely picked it up, "That wasn't a planet. That was a trap." Another survivor broke protocol and smashed his helmet with a steel chair before being restrained. He kept screaming one word in Carnathal: "Eyes, eyes, eyes." As the last pods lifted off, several went missing, not shot down, not destroyed, just vanished from radar. No heat, no signal. The recovery crews scanned for days. Nothing. And for those who made it back into orbit, the horror wasn't over, because the fleet's sensors began detecting signals from deep within Earth's crust. Old frequencies, deep cycle pings, Terran-coded. The kind used for long-term tactical AI networks, ones that shouldn't exist anymore, ones that had gone dark 3 centuries ago, and now were waking up. The order came from the high seat of command: purge the grid, burn the logs, cut all connections. They didn't even attempt to send a warning to others. There was nothing to say, because Earth didn't just fight, it had waited. And now, as the last ship cleared orbit, no one dared to look back. Because in their deepest instincts, beyond rank, beyond pride, beyond logic, they knew the truth. They hadn't escaped. They had been allowed to leave. The Carnathal Empire had no ceremony for failure. Their culture was built on strength, on clean victories, on conquest. Defeat wasn't just shameful, it was erased. And yet the Earth incident couldn't be hidden. Too many ships lost, too many leaders missing, too many whispers spreading from one fleet to the next. The High Council gathered for the first time in a century. Not to plan an attack, to classify a threat. Earth was relogged in the Universal Database, not as prey, not as a developing world, not even as hostile, but as a containment class zone, a designation reserved for biological anomalies. Plague worlds, places where entry was not only discouraged but forbidden. The new tag under Earth's name was brief. No recovery, no pursuit. Extreme psychological hazard. Behavior beyond comprehension. Predators not advised to engage. The word human was stricken from target rosters. Hunting simulations were rewritten to avoid Earth-like terrain. Trainees were taught to skip Sol System entirely, and the myth began. It started in hushed voices among younger Carnathal who hadn't seen Earth, but had seen the survivors. They spoke of silent forests, of humans that moved without sound, of traps that changed shape, of eyes that didn't blink. Some said Earth was cursed, others said it was a living weapon. But those who had been there didn't argue. They just stayed quiet, because they had seen, and they had heard the final message broadcast on a long-abandoned channel, one that no ship in the Carnathal fleet dared to answer. It came once, then never again. A Terran signal. Plain. Cold. We were never prey. You were simply mistaken. And with that, Earth went silent again. No follow-up, no threat, no promise of war, because Earth didn't need to threaten anyone, not anymore. Its silence was enough. And from that day forward, the apex predators of the galaxy gave Earth a wide berth, not because they were afraid of humans, but because they knew. Humans don't hunt for sport. They hunt to remind you why you don't come back.